I met Lorraine at a grief support group in Savannah, Georgia, and I never told her that the modest brick house we moved into together was actually paid off. Free and clear. Along with 2 rental properties I owned across town and a storage facility out on Route 17 that brought in more each month than most people's salaries. I told her I was just getting by on my pension, and God forgive me, I am not ashamed of that. Not one bit. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 64 years old. I buried my wife of 31 years 3 summers ago, and I spent those first years alone learning the hard way that grief makes you vulnerable in ways you never expect. My daughter kept telling me I was too trusting. My son-in-law said I wore my whole life on my face, like an open book anyone could read. I didn't believe either of them. Then I met her. It was a Tuesday evening in October, the kind of evening where the air still holds some of the day's warmth, but you can feel the cold underneath it, waiting. The group met in the fellowship hall of a Baptist church on Bull Street. Folding chairs in a circle, bad coffee in styrofoam cups, people telling the truth about how much it hurts to come home to a quiet house. I had been going for about 6 months, long enough to know most of the faces. She walked in halfway through the session, apologized softly for being late, and sat down 2 chairs to my left. She had silver-streaked hair pulled back simply, and she wore a grey cardigan that looked like she had owned it for years. Nothing about her seemed like an act. That was the thing. Nothing at all. After the session, she laughed at something I said about the coffee, and we ended up talking in the parking lot for 45 minutes. She had lost her husband 2 years prior. She had a son, she told me, 22 years old, living at home, trying to find his footing. She said it with a kind of tired love that I recognized immediately. The love of a parent who has been holding someone else up for a long time. I drove home that night thinking about her laugh. I know how that sounds. We dated for 8 months. She was warm and funny, and she remembered small things, the way I took my coffee, that my lower back bothered me on cold mornings, that I always got quiet when I talked about my wife. She never pushed. She just sat with me in those quiet moments, and that meant more to me than I can properly explain. My daughter met her twice. After the second time, she pulled me aside in my own kitchen and said, very carefully, "Dad, I think she's lovely. I just want you to take your time." My son-in-law said less, but I caught him watching a son at the one dinner we all had together. The young man, I'll call him her son, because that's all he was to me, a fact I almost forgot, sat at my table and barely looked up from his phone. When I asked him what he was studying, he said, "Nothing really," with a shrug that told me everything and nothing at the same time. I told myself he was just awkward around new people. I told myself a lot of things. When she and I talked about getting married, I was honest with her about some things and deliberately vague about others. I told her I owned my home. I did not tell her it was worth 3 times what she might have guessed, or that I had income coming in from properties across Savannah, or that my wife and I had spent 30 years being careful with money in ways that had added up to something substantial. I am not a wealthy man by some measures. By the measures of our neighborhood, our life, I was comfortable in a way that was invisible, unless you looked at the right paperwork. I had a reason for that vagueness. It was a feeling, nothing I could point to, just something that had been sitting at the back of my chest since about the 4th month we were together. When she mentioned, only once, and never again, that her son needed a fresh start and that a lot of people his age were moving to Atlanta or Charlotte for opportunities. The way she said it, the way she looked at me when she said it, just briefly, just a fraction of a second, I filed it away and tried to forget it. I couldn't forget it. 2 months before the wedding, I sat down with my attorney, a man I have trusted for 15 years. I told him what I was doing and what I was worried about. He didn't blink. We drew up a prenuptial agreement that was clear and fair. She would be provided for if something happened to me. but my properties and my savings remained mine, titled in a trust that predated our relationship. She signed it without comment. I thought that was a good sign. I told myself it was a good sign. We got married on a Saturday in March. Small ceremony, just family and a handful of close friends, at the church where I had been a member for 20 years. My daughter cried happy tears. My granddaughter was the flower girl and took the job more seriously than anyone else in the room. My son-in-law shook my hand afterward and said, "I hope you're right about this." I told him I was. We came home that evening and had a quiet dinner, just the two of us, and it was nice, simple and nice. She fell asleep on the couch watching television, and I sat there in the lamplight thinking, maybe I was wrong to be suspicious. Maybe the prenup was paranoia. Maybe I had let grief make me cynical. I almost believed that. Sunday came and went. We unpacked a few more boxes of her things. She had moved in a week before the wedding, and I cooked breakfast, and we sat on the back porch with coffee. It was a good day, I thought. This is what it feels like to have your life quiet down in a good way. Monday morning, I drove to the hardware store to pick up a few things. I was gone maybe 2 hours. When I came back, her son was sitting at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a laptop, and he looked up at me with an expression I cannot fully describe. Not quite guilt, not quite challenge, somewhere in between, and said, "Hey, we need to talk about the living situation." I set my keys down on the counter very slowly. Her son was 22 years old. He had been living with his mother in a 2-bedroom apartment across town that she had been renting month to month. His name appeared on no lease, no utility bill, nothing. As far as I had ever understood, the plan was that he would eventually, soon, relatively soon, move toward independence. That had been the implication. That had been what I believed. What I did not know, what I was about to learn sitting in my own kitchen on the second full day of my marriage, was that the plan, apparently, had always been different. She came in from the hallway and sat down across from me. She had her hands folded on the table. I noticed she was not quite meeting my eyes. Her son explained, and she nodded along, that the apartment lease was ending at the end of the month. That they had assumed, both of them, that he would be moving in with us, indefinitely. That this house, my house, the house I had owned for 19 years, the house where I had raised my daughter, the house where my wife had taken her last breath in the bedroom at the end of the hall, would become his home too. I said nothing for a moment. Then I asked my wife, very quietly, if this was something she had planned to discuss with me before the wedding. She said they had talked about it. I said I didn't remember that conversation. She said she thought it was understood. I said I didn't understand it. Her son shifted in his chair and made a sound that was almost a laugh, not quite, and said, "I mean, it's not like there isn't room." There it was. I looked at my wife. She was looking at the table. I said, "I need to think." I got up and I went out to the back porch and I stood there for a long time looking at the yard. My wife had planted a small pot of herbs by the back steps the week before. Basil and parsley. I remember staring at that pot of herbs and feeling something cold and clarifying move through me. That feeling I had filed away. The one from the conversation about Atlanta and Charlotte, the one I had tried to forget. It came back to me now with a specificity I hadn't expected. I understood now what that conversation had actually been about. It wasn't about opportunities. It was about me. She had been calculating where her son was going to land, and I had been the answer she'd arrived at, and she had walked me down that aisle knowing it, and I had not known it at all. I went back inside. I sat down at the table again. Her son had his arms crossed now. My wife was looking at me with an expression I was seeing for the first time, something careful and slightly hard around the edges. I said, "I want to be clear about something. This house is mine. I own it outright. My finances are structured through a trust that my attorney manages, and you both signed a prenuptial agreement that documents this clearly. I am not able to add an additional occupant to this household without a formal conversation. Not a retroactive one, but one that should have happened before we were married. Her son started to say something about family. I let him finish. Then I said, I also want you to know that I spoke to my daughter this morning. I hadn't, actually. I called her from the hardware store parking lot on a hunch, the same hunch that made me feel like I needed someone who loved me to know where I was and what was happening. She'll be stopping by this evening. Something shifted in the room. I cannot explain it precisely. It was like the pressure changed. My wife looked at her son. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she said, I don't understand why you're making this into something adversarial. I said, I'm not. I'm making it into something honest. My daughter arrived at 5. She walked in and read the room in about 4 seconds the way she always has. She gets that from her mother. And she sat down beside me and put her hand on the table without touching mine, just near it, just so I would know. We talked for a long time that evening. Or rather, my wife and her son talked, and I listened, and my daughter listened, and eventually the conversation ran out of places to go. By the end of it, certain things had been said that could not be unsaid. My wife had made it clear, in the way that people sometimes do when they feel their position slipping, that she had expected this marriage to mean more practical support than she was apparently going to receive. Her son had made it clear that he considered the arrangement I was describing, where he would not simply move in, where there would be no open-ended financial support flowing from me to him, to be something close to a betrayal. My daughter drove home without saying, I told you so. She has never once said that to me, not in my entire life. She called me at 9 that night and asked if I was okay, and I said I thought I would be, and she said, Dad, you were smart to be careful. Mum always said you were too nice and not careful enough, but she was wrong. You're both. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. The marriage lasted 11 days. I know that sounds like the punchline to a bad joke. It wasn't. It was one of the saddest and most clarifying 11 days of my life. We tried. I want to say that plainly. I did not want it to end. Even after everything, even after what had been revealed in that kitchen, I sat with my wife on that back porch on the 5th evening and said, if we start from where we actually are, honestly, is there something here worth keeping? She looked at me for a long time, and then she said, I just thought you would be more generous. Not I love you, not I want to make this work, not even anger or hurt pride, just I thought you would be more generous. I nodded. I think I already knew then. Her son moved back to the apartment when it was clear that no other arrangement was forthcoming. My wife followed him 4 days later. She called me from the road and said she needed space to think. I said I understood. She said she would be in touch. We have not spoken since. My attorney handled the dissolution quietly. The prenup made it straightforward. She contested nothing. I think she understood that there was nothing to contest. Not because I had been cruel or dishonest, but because I had been, against my own instincts, careful. I sat in my living room the evening after everything was finalized, and it was quiet in the way my house had been quiet for those years after my wife passed. Not empty, exactly, but still. I have learned the difference between a stillness that is loss and a stillness that is peace. This was closer to peace than I would have expected. My granddaughter came over the following Saturday. She is 7 years old, and she has absolutely no interest in the emotional complexity of adult life, which I mean as the highest possible compliment. She wanted to water the herbs on the back steps. I handed her the small watering can, and she went at it with the same seriousness she had brought to the flower girl job, brow furrowed, a little too much water probably, deeply committed to the task. I watched her from the doorway, and I thought about what my daughter had said, about being nice and being careful, and that her mother had thought I was both. I think what I want anyone to hear, if any part of this finds its way to someone who needs it, is this: trusting your instincts is not the same as being suspicious of everyone. I did not distrust that woman because she was a bad person in some absolute sense. I was careful because something in me said to be careful, and I had learned the long way, the slow way, the way you learn things after 60 years of living, to listen to that voice. My wife, my real wife, the one I lost, used to say that the body knows things the mind hasn't caught up to yet. She said it about everything from job decisions to choosing the right doctor to which road to take when two routes look the same on the map. She was usually right. I am not looking to meet anyone new. I am not opposed to it either. But I have decided that whoever comes next, if anyone does, will know me fully, and I will know them fully, and we will not skip any of the hard conversations in favor of the easy warmth of feeling chosen. Being chosen is not the same as being seen. I know that now in a way I did not know it before, and I am grateful for the clarity. Even if the way I got it was hard. Some lessons come easy. Some you have to earn. This one I earned, and I am going to keep it. The basil is doing well, by the way. My granddaughter waters it every Saturday.